Okay, friends, thanks very much for asking me along today. And as I say, I'm going to keep this quite focused on a few key things, quite different things in many ways from what we've been talking about. And I'll tell you, it's an interesting wee thing that 43 or 44 years ago, whatever it was, when I went to this equivalent conference, if you think back, at that time, the question still being debated was, should Scottish literature be a subject in its own right? Which just sounds completely ridiculous now. We've sat here listening to all this wonderful stuff today. Scottish literature is not just a subject, it's a universe of experience. Yet, Scotland's storytelling tradition is thousands, if not hundreds of thousands years older than our literary tradition. And I just want to focus a wee bit, not on history or older things, but on the skills, the creative skills and arts that are involved in live oral storytelling. So I'm thinking here about the creative methodologies, which of course are used now in spoken word and oral storytelling and all the rest, all across the world, not just to convey traditional materials, but to convey new content in these same creative and I think quite engaging processes. So I'm going to touch on three things. First of all, oral storytelling as a style of communication, thinking there about what might be in it for teachers and what might be in it for pupils in terms of skills, confidence, communication, etc. Then I just want to touch very briefly on some of the, I'll just take one example of the patterns of oral storytelling and how they are interesting critical tools for what's going on in social media and literature and film, just briefly. I think you'll probably know as much about that as me, so we'll pass that over quite quickly. And third, I want to touch on how, and I'm sort of focusing both in Scotland, but it's very much an international dimension, about how this style of storytelling is an ecological connector. How one of its most powerful uses now is reconnecting people to a sense of land, sea, and natural life. So those are my three hits, okay? So let's start with the communication style. And this is the thing that's so hard for literary fond people to deal with this. The text is not the main thing. The text is not the main thing. Oral storytelling works round, above, under. The text is a kind of guideline, a kind of shape that has to be reinterpreted each time. So I'm going to give you an example of a story, and just think of this in terms of the non-verbal aspects, okay? And so this is a story, it's like that wee story we heard from Summer Walkers. It comes from Scotland's Travelling People, one of the huge cultural and creative resources we have in Scotland, astonishing. A story that I heard directly told to me by Duncan Williamson, and I picked up on it recently because during this year of stories I was working with schools in the Loch Awe and Oban area, and I wanted to try and source some stories that were local to them and sort of share them back, and I found this one. And I then found myself telling this story to contemporary filmmakers who were working on pieces about the Selkies and creating new films about the seal, the Selkie people. And then I found myself telling it to the Grassmarket Community Project with recovering addicts, who incidentally were a great audience. You've got a lot to, keep up to here. And, and then just a couple of weeks back, I was telling it to staff at Edinburgh College who are working in literature and drama. And that's just an example to let you know that the thing about storytelling is you don't pick up a story, have a go at it, and then drop it. You live with it for a time, okay? So, in this story, there is a seal hunter. This is the times when seals were still widely killed. And there was a seal hunter in Argyll called Duncan Mackinnon. And Duncan was a very successful seal hunter. And of course, they weren't hunting the seals for the food. In fact, when Duncan killed a seal, he just threw the food element back to the gulls or whatever. It was the seal skin, which was used for boots and waterproof clothes and all the rest of it. And also, Duncan, he did not use a club, he did not use a gun, he used knives, seal hunting knives. And the reason for that, of course, is because they did least damage to the skin. And he would creep up on the rocks, he would come up behind a seal, and he would plunge the knife into the neck, this vulnerable place where there was a lot of veins and whatever, and hang on in there until the seal expired. And the one thing, in fairness to Duncan, think about it later thing was he did not kill young seals. He had that indigenous wit. You don't kill the young. Now, Duncan, there was a good demand for his seal skins until he hit this particular period where he had accumulated quite a lot of skins and there seemed to be few buyers. So they were piling up in his wee cottage by the sea. And in addition to that, he had a stroke of bad luck with one of his best knives because he was creeping up on a big bull seal or a big, magnificent beast on a rocky inlet. And up he went with his usual thing, and he thrust the knife in. He got it in the right place, but the seal was overstrong for him. And the seal just leapt off into the sea, shaking off Duncan and taking Duncan's best hunting knife with him. So this night, Duncan's in his wee hoose, by the light of the fire, having a dram and just thinking about things. There's a knock at the door. Well, that's unusual. In a place like this, if people know you, they don't knock on the door, they just come in. So he went to the door and he opened it. It was quite dark outside. They could make up a tall, dark figure. Seemed to be in a long sort of black coat or whatever. Are you Duncan Mackinnon? Aye. Are you the seal hunter? Aye. Have you any seal skins to sell? I have. Oh, well, he said, a stranger at the door. He said, I've got a friend there. He's just waiting up the hill there on the edge of the rock face. And would you like to come up and meet him and maybe you can strike a deal? And Doug said, right. So he got his jacket and he went out and he followed this big, tall lad. And the figure just turned and moved and began to walk up, and Duncan just went after him. Up and up they went through the darkness, and his eyes became a wee bit accustomed to the night. And there they were on the top of the rock face, and he's looking around, and he couldn't see anybody else. And he sort of turned around to say, oh, well, where's your friend? And this big stranger, he puts one arm around Duncan's middle like that. And he puts the other arm around his mouth like that. And he went, and then he tightened his grip and he jumped, taking Duncan with him, right off the top of the cliff. Down they shot and plunge, splash into the sea. And down they went, the weight of this big fella dragging Duncan down with him. And like every shade of blue and dark and whatever flashing by Duncan's eyes, and down they went. And he's beginning to struggle for his breath when down there in the dark under the sea, it's like suddenly there's a little, like an entrance maybe to some kind of little tunnel, and there's light coming out of there. And the big fella just takes Duncan under his arm. He pulls in, swims into that light. And sure enough, it's like a tunnel. And in they follow up this tunnel. And the big fella takes his hand off Duncan's mouth. And then before Duncan realizes, suddenly they're into a huge underwater cavern. It's like a cathedral of the oceans. Rock formations and lights flickering like torches all round. And Duncan's looking round like this, and then he realizes that there's all these figures, just like the tall black stranger, dressed in black, dark hair, brown eyes, sitting around on seats all over the floor of this chamber. And the big man begins to move, and Duncan has to follow him. And as Duncan goes through, every single person in the chamber turns and fixes these liquid eyes on Duncan, when he realizes that every single one of them is holding a seal hunter's knife. Anyway, he follows through, and the big fellow goes into this chamber at the back. And in he goes, and the big fella's here, Duncan's here, and there's like a rocky couch, just a slab of rock lying there. And on it is lying a great bull seal, breathing painfully in agony. And the tall stranger says to Duncan Mackinnon, "That's your work, Duncan. That is your work. That is my father." And Duncan looks again, and there's this suppurating, horrific wound in the old seal's neck, and still stuck in it is Duncan's best hunting knife. And Duncan looks at it, and the pus is oozing out of it. The kids like this bit, by the way. Because don't be concerned. The pus is oozing out of it. It's thinking. And the tall city said, "Draw the knife and kiss the wound. Draw the knife and kiss the wound. We're going to give you one chance, Duncan Mackinnon, because you never killed a young seal. You're going to get another chance. Draw the knife and kiss the wound." This is when you ask people, what do you want to do? But I'll skip that bit because we're in a hurry. So Duncan goes forward, and the stink and that sort of bloody, streaky yellow mess. Oh, it's a mess. But anyway, he steals himself, pulls forward, and out draws the knife. And then, shutting his eyes, he leans forward and he touches the lips of the wound with his lips, and he can taste salt. He can taste salty blood in his tongue. And he steps back and just looks. And before his eyes, a transformation is taking place. For that wound is closing up. It's closing up and it's healing. And on top of that, the old seal is turning into one of the Selkie people, like his son and all the others in the cavern, with a long black cloak and the dark hair and the brown eyes. And the old fella swings round off the rocky bench. He says, Duncan Mackinnon, you've done the right thing today. And he said, and we're going to give you a chance, for you never killed a young seal. Bring something for Duncan. Bring Duncan something. He must get another chance. Somebody came with an old bag, and Duncan's holding it like this, and he's just looking round. And before anything else can happen, the tall, young Selkie man has turned, and he's gesturing Duncan, and Duncan has to follow him. Back they go through that chamber, looked at by all those figures with the brown eyes and the black hair, and out they get down into the tunnel. As they're coming down the tunnel, Duncan can feel the cold air coming up at him. And the big seal man, he gets one arm round Duncan's middle like that, and he gets one arm round like that over his mouth. and he clamps shut in his mouth, and the big fellow propels the two of them out into the ocean. And suddenly, up, up, up they go through all that dark and blue marine and all those deep colours of the ocean, and up, powering up and up until Duncan's gasping for breath, and whoosh, they break through the surface, and Duncan's drawing in fresh air. The big seal man just powers over, round the cliff, onto a beach, and he drops Duncan there, and he turns and he disappears. Duncan picks himself up. Back, he staggers up to the cottage, gets the whiskey bottle, and he's just absolutely exhausted, and he's just sitting there, and he doesn't think of anything until eventually he thinks of the old hide bag, and he goes to get it, and it's full of old-fashioned golden pieces. Now, as the story was told to me, and I'm only telling you the story as I heard it, so, don't take it out on me in any way. It had a kind of happy ending, which was that Duncan Mackinnon, he never hurt a seal again. He never hunted the seals, and he used that money to buy an island off the shore of Argyll, which became the first seal sanctuary in Scotland. And my Duncan, the Williamson one, would always finish that with great satisfaction, with that slightly kind of moral, ecological message. And you think, was that how he heard it, or did he add that to it? But that's how he wanted to tell it, and that's how I tell it to you. Now, it's not actually the content of that story that I'm thinking about. It's the visuals. So Philip Pullman, who learned all his kind of children's writing and storytelling thing by actually doing live storytelling with these secondary age kids in class. That was what inspired him all to this. He has written some very interesting essays about oral storytelling. He talks about that as like it being a sequence of visual schemas. And you can change the words all the time. You can have less words, you can have more words and whatever. But what is critical is that everybody gets the shapes of the story. Okay, so this is why it's interesting, the non-verbal aspects and the verbal aspects working together. And that's a skill. Whatever it is people are presenting or talking to people about, forget all this bloody PowerPoints. And, there's a madness about PowerPoints, right? I'm here now, I'm giving you this talk, but could you just look at my PowerPoint? Well, are we looking at the PowerPoint because we can't understand what you're saying and we need the PowerPoint? Or are you talking to us because you think we can't follow the PowerPoint? It's divided focus, okay? And oral storytelling skills are all about unified focus. Okay, so I'm going to skip the bit about, the hero, Shiro's journey. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And that's a fascinating pattern. And looking at some of these things that come from oral storytelling, you can learn how to deconstruct narratives that are shared on media. You can learn this critical literacy, I think I heard the words, and that applies to visual stuff, film and everything as well. And, stuff like the hero or Shiro's narrative with all its different stages of encounter and conflict and resolution and learning, and then maybe having to start a bit all over again. All of that, it's just everybody's utilizing it. Computer games, films, politicians who are casting themselves in the hero role. So there's an interesting thing there about critical perception and analysis in popular media stuff, which is connected with literature, that very much comes out of the oral storytelling. Right, third, the ecological thing. So in the now many decades, 50 years really, that I've been working with communities, including urban working class communities who have oral traditions, who kept oral traditions alive. One of the things that has struck me that there's a high proportion of important oral traditional stories in Scotland that are really about the connection between humans and the natural world. That's central. You see a bit of that in the seal story there, but it's in everything. It's in plants, it's whatever. And I have wrestled with how on earth to try and convey that. So we are part of a worldwide thing called Earth Stories Collection, where we've been gathering now thousands of traditional Indigenous stories from countries all over the world and a huge diversity of languages that address ecological values and kind of worldview mindset. And but I've particularly been looking at the Scottish side of it, and I've got a couple of books coming out in 2 weeks' time, actually, which try, one is called Storm and Shore, and one which is in Scots is called Sot and Blood, which try to express in a literary form what is important about the connection between storytellers and the landscape and the natural world. And one is set, Storm and Shore is set in a remote area of mainland Argyll, and it's contemporary and explores the idea of sanctuary and how people come to a location like that seeking sanctuary. What does that mean in contemporary terms? What are they going to discover? And it's through the storytelling traditions that that's opened up. Sot and Blood reflects the Norse influence on Scottish culture, which has always been underestimated and not understood. And it's not just about Orkney and Shetland, it's all over. So it's set in an East Coast thing, and it's particularly about the life of the sea, and it uses the medium of Scots prose, as somebody was talking about earlier, to address the kind of linguistic and cultural nature of the Norse Scottish sources. So that's sagas, folk tales, and the mythic stories, and Scots restores to them some of that gutsy, strong connection and natural connection as well that is so often undersold when people repeatedly translate, for example, those Norse myths as if they were for children. For children? My God, brutal sex, violence, whatever, you know, gutsy stuff. Scots can do the job. Scots can do the job. Don't undersell the Scots. But anyway, and I'll be interested to see the reaction because I still think, and this is now my finishing bit, I still think that oral storytelling is undervalued as part of, not because it should be dominant anyway, just because it's a creative part and contributor to all aspects of Scottish literature, past and present. We've heard that mentioned a few times. And I think we could benefit a lot. I think it would help us take some of the Scottish literary content and really deliver it in educational and community cultural ways where it's really got an immediate rapport. And just, did you notice that little extract from The Summer Walkers? That's the travellers, about the child, the traveller woman trying to give the child away, how vivid that was. Because it's a little bit of oral reminiscence. And of course, internationally, all over the world, oral storytelling, oral tradition, of course, connects with song. Gerda was touching on that too. Is still vigorous and still an important contributor. And it kind of, I think it's part of our internationality that, you know, Ghanaian or Nigerian literature or South American literature or whatever would do these things, and so does Scottish literature. Yeah. Urban and rural. So I think it's a bit of a hard sell because we're in love with the text, the authority of the text. You know, we are. It's because, I don't know, we were all brought up as biblical fundamentalists or something. I don't know. But, you know, we worship the text. We think that's so authoritative. And there still persists a strange idea, which just mentioned the Norse thing, that all this storytelling thing is kind of childish. And even some of the people who played a hugely important part in keeping oral storytelling alive and saving oral versions of stories just went on about they belonged to the bairn time of the race or something, which is just kind of, well, you could use, you know, rude words. Hamish Henderson, turned all that round. So we're in a different scenario. So friend, that's my final. It's been a fantastic day. Thank you to ESL for setting this all up, giving us such a rich palette. And you couldn't let the year of Scotland's stories go by with just hearing a bit about the oral storytelling stream. It's a gift. Use it. Thank you very much.